Now, with Utah's business, with our business community's priorities fresh in mind, we now welcome our Utah legislative leadership to discuss how these priorities can be implemented and what we can expect as the new legislative session begins. Please welcome our moderator, the Chamber's General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Public Policy, Jacey Skinner. She will be joined by panelists Stuart Adams, President of the Senate, Utah Senate Majority Whip Ann Millner, Utah House of Representatives Majority Whip Michael Schultz, and Utah House of Representatives Majority Assistant Whip Val Peterson. Please give them a warm welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our panelists. This is an extraordinary, I think, event for us to be able to hear from our leaders at both the federal and state level as we go into 2021, but also our state legislative session. And I will say, as we've prepared for this event and we've spoken with various members of the business community, it's been remarkable how I think people are looking at things a little differently this year and are truly looking for information and looking for that signaling from their leaders as to what we can expect, what they need to be planning for, how they can adapt, how they can continue to pivot, and as Derek mentioned, come out of this current economic situation in the best position possible so that we can get back to the things that we do so well here in Utah moving forward. I do want to take just a personal note here a moment and just thank you all. And I know all of you share this, but we are so privileged here in Utah to have leaders who really do work together, again, as is demonstrated today. In speaking with colleagues from across the country, they have not had the benefit through this past year of access to their leaders, of leaders who are willing to come into special sessions and address really tough issues time and time again. We take that for granted here often, and so I just want to let each of you know that we don't take you for granted, and we really do appreciate that work, and I'd ask each of you if we could just give them a round of applause for their work through all of this. I want to start out today with kind of a big topic, but the number one priority for the business community this year, from our perspective, is really making sure that Utah's regulatory environment remains stable through the remainder of this crisis. We want businesses to be able to focus on the issues at hand and be able to focus again on coming out of this in the best position possible rather than adapting to new strenuous or difficult regulations. I noticed yesterday, President Adams, and I want to turn this to you real quickly, you were talking about some potential changes to the tax structure and some other things, but just to turn it to you, what do you see on the horizon for Utah's regulatory environment this year?
Thank you, and let me thank the Chamber for all you do. This has been a tough year. I don't think anyone would say anything different. That some people have done very well, but this has been at least the toughest year that I've experienced as a legislator. Really appreciate the support and the efforts of the business community. Before I get into the regulatory structure, I'll just say that we have a really great tax structure, and we have a really great revenue stream. But this year we're going to have anywhere between $500 million of ongoing to $1 billion of one-time money we're looking at. You compare that to New York and California when they've got $54 million deficits, $59 million billion. Scott, I'm saying million. $59 billion in New York and California. We've tried to use a blended approach through the COVID in Utah, and it's really the business community. It's not the legislature, but it's a business community that's been able to step up, stay open. Since I think May 1 last year, we've had most of our restaurants and hair salons and gyms open. They've done it in a safe way. Our case fatality rate's very low, but as we look out into the future and we see this revenue coming in, and we see what we've done for education, I think we'll maybe talk about that even more. It's really important that we try to figure out what has made us so successful, and we need to make sure that we keep that secret sauce going. And part of that is that Utah has made a concerted effort to not put additional regulations on business, but to try to be responsible and deregulate as much as we can to allow that private sector, the free markets, to be able to generate the revenue that allows us to have those tax dollars to be able to fund education and the other government services that we have. So we talked the other day, and I think 2021 may be the year of a tax cut. We're looking at a tax cut. We've set $80 million of money aside. We're looking at multiple different things, and hopefully we'll have good debate during the session. Social Security tax is really been a difficult thing for the state. Many states don't tax Social Security. Military retirement's been another one. We have a great number of military people that want to retire and do retire, and we need, they actually come in and they're great assets to our universities and others, business communities that come into the state and use their expertise to help us. Tax on productivity, we'd always look at that as trying to reduce that burden on productivity. And then as we did the federal tax reform, the dependent exemption, as we removed that, it's because of the large families in Utah's maybe put a little disadvantage. So we're looking at all that, and I think we'll do a tax cut. So anyway, thanks.
I'll ask, anyone else want to chime in on regulatory environment?
Yeah, just let me say, my daughter was here from out of state over Christmas, and she was just amazed at how open Utah was in comparison to the states she was coming from. And so I think that we've really worked hard to try to get a balance there to the regulatory environment we find ourselves with COVID-19. The fact that our restaurants are open as much as they are. Have a good friend that runs a restaurant, and he said that even with the 3 months that he was closed, that he's as the year is totaled out, he's only down 4% overall. And so I think it really points to the fact that we've worked really hard to make sure that restaurants and businesses can be open, that we continue to have a very diverse economy here in the state of Utah, which allows us to have the types of revenues that we do in the state, and to be able to look at these things like President Adams is talking about, a tax cut. And we just hope we can continue to do this as we work through and make sure that people get the vaccine and can reopen the economy.
So I'm a former Senator Dan Himmert and Representative Malloy from the House have been working on some legislation related to regulatory sandboxes and starting to say, you know, we kind of know more about our traditional industries and what we're doing. How do we deregulate those environments? But as we have new industries and new technologies, making sure that we aren't doing something that really is putting a regulatory barrier in places that we don't need to be. We ought to be focused on that. I'll be picking that piece of legislation up from former Senator Himmert, and he can talk more about it because he's going to be on a panel later. But I think that's really a proactive approach in Utah to saying we want to make sure that private industry has the ability to do the work they need to do to drive our economy, to build their companies, and make sure that we aren't putting unintended regulatory barriers in front of them. And so look forward to that in the session.
Jacey, if I may, real quick. So I appreciate the Chamber's stance on this. I think as we look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. and the current situation, there's a lot of talk about additional regulations coming down from the new Congress and the new Biden administration. I think that makes what we do here in Utah even more important. If we can find ways to even reduce business regulations, I think that's what Utah generally does for the most part. And you look at the successes that we've had in our state. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation. We have one of the lowest poverty rates in the nation. We're number one for upward mobility in the nation, and I think we have the strongest middle class in the nation. And I think those are the things that we want to focus on and continue to happen, and I truly believe it's because we believe in having less government involved and more of the private sector involved. So I hopefully we continue down that pathway.
Thank you. And I have to apologize. I took for granted that everyone would just know who you are, and I'm sure they do. But I should introduce you. So thank you. We have President Stuart Adams here with us, President of the Senate, and our Majority Whip in the Senate, Senator Ann Millner. Then from our House, we have our Majority Whip, Representative Mike Schultz, and Assistant Majority Whip Representative Val Peterson. These are all always so kind to be here with us, so thank you, and forgive my faux pas there. Along the same line, I want to move to economic development, and I'll open this up to all of you. But as we look at a new administration, again, a new on both the state and the federal level, and we look at issues of economic development as we emerge from this current time, what are your thoughts? What are your plans in relation to how we approach economic development here in the state? How we reach those rural areas? How we capitalize on what we've been doing? Representative Schultz, maybe I can send that to you first.
Representative
Schultz, forgive me.
Don't.
Hey, we'll take him.
No,
I know how loyal he is.
I am. I'm very loyal to the House. We have a great Senate, but I'm a little partial to the House. So, well, that's a great question. I think mainly what we need to keep doing is what Utah's done in the past. I think we've let out in so many different areas in the nation. Getting our economy open was huge. We were one of the first states to get our economy opened. As President Adams mentioned, we have one of the lowest death rates in regards to COVID-19. We truly have great people here in the state, and you combine that with great business leaders. You combine that with a good government, and we can succeed regardless of what happens inside of Washington. We bring it back home, and we can figure out the ways and figure out the challenges to do it right.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? Senator Millner?
Thank you. So a couple of things I think are really important. You're going to see also some legislation this session around developing a state strategy for economic development. And you may say, well, we are already doing things, and we are. But how do we take that up to the next level? How do we think about this over the next decade and build a strategy that I think could be different in two different ways? One, we've done very well along the Wasatch Front. We know that our urban areas are doing well. We can be much more strategic and targeted about economic development along the Wasatch Front and make sure that we're really helping to grow the companies that we want to grow in this area. They're going to be part of the next generation economy. I think that's incredibly important for us. On the other hand, we have rural Utah. We have to make sure that we're really building a support system that makes sure we have strong economic development that goes across the state. And I think we have to do that in a way that's based on the community assets of those particular communities, and they're different. If Senator Winterton's here, and if you kind of look out in the Vernal Duchesne area, what we do there is going to be very different than what we might do down in Grand County or in the Panguitch area, et cetera. So we have to think about what the community assets are and help build strategies. We have to think about what are the key infrastructure needs they're going to have in order to be able to do that. And we all normally think about water and we think about roads, but in the world we live in today, we've got to think about broadband. And we've got to make sure we have kind of high rate fiber that will support being able to do more remote learning and remote work and remote healthcare in those communities in ways that really make sense. And then finally, I think it's really important, while some of our industries have done very well in the last year, we have some that are really suffering, and we know that we have people that have lost jobs. We have got to continue to work on those learn and earn programs and other job retraining programs, and making sure we're helping people get the training they need quickly to get into other jobs that are opening up in this area, and we have to be much more agile and focused. And at the same time, for me, I think we have to try to not just think about the here and now, we have to think about the next decade. I am continuing to read more about kind of the post-pandemic economy and what's happening in terms of the acceleration with technology. Just read an article the other day talking about 800 kind of global CEOs saying, here's the kinds of people we're hiring. If you looked at that beyond those who they were bringing in just to kind of deal with pandemic kind of safety and health issues around cleaning, et cetera, where they're hiring is in this technology area. People that can support AI, more digitization. They're looking at robotics. I mean, there's just this wide range of technologies. We have to make sure in Utah that we're developing the workforce for the future. So we're not only strong now, but we will be strong a decade from now.
Yeah, and I just think that one of our responsibilities as a legislature is to make sure we're fostering an environment where all of you can thrive. And so as you listen to all these things that we're talking about, it's really about creating a situation where you all can move forward and that you can have the workforce that you need, that we're making sure that we keep taxes low, that we are providing the infrastructure, and we know that if we don't continue to invest in infrastructure, that's the number one thing that creates a stumbling block for all of you. And then, of course, workforce development, that we're working with higher ed and our technology schools to make sure that you have the types of employees that you need to be successful. And with that, I'll just let President Adams sum it all up.
Well, our future couldn't be brighter in Utah. I mean, we've had a blended approach as we've gone through COVID. It's been very difficult. There are industries that are still struggling. We know the entertainment industry is, and those, health theaters and others. I want to tell you, we're not going to forget you. We're still working. We're trying to find a way, and I'll maybe talk about COVID later, but I think there's a way to make sure that we lift everyone. But as I look around the state, I mean, fiber, Senator Millner talked about it. We've been found out. I mean, from my house to here is 23 minutes. From my house to Snow Basin is 23 minutes. I mean, you can recreate here so easy in Utah, and people know that. People from California, everyone are coming here to live because they found out they can actually work in a COVID environment in Utah, and we're having a lot of in-migration because of that. And it's a great spot to be. Utah is because of the potential for growth. You add that to the fact that we have the prison site that we're all working on and trying to redevelop that next to Silicon Slopes. The IT industry is not going to go backwards. They're going to be forward. They're probably the solution out into the future. And then you look at new technology. I mean, I love retail because I do a lot of it in my personal life. But I think there's more trucks that come to my house every day. I mean, I don't know if it's UPS or Amazon or what it is or Postal Service, but it seems every day there's at least one, if not three, trucks that are showing up at my house. And the inland port is the future. If we can't get our goods and services out into the world and we can't receive them from the world, we're going to be in trouble. And we're on the cutting edge of a great inland port. And then you look north and you look at Falcon Hill and the 550 acres, the biggest enhanced use lease in the entire military. And yet Northrop Grumman's there. They're hiring 4,000, maybe 6,000 people. In the last 18 months, they built 3 buildings. I mean, it's what's happening in the aerospace industry. I mean, we are in good shape in Utah, and I think our economy is going to thrive. It's not just going to do great. It's not going to be good. I mean, it's going to do great. And we just need to help manage it, and that'll be our biggest problem, is managing growth. But I think our future, despite COVID, despite what we've experienced this last year, I think it's as bright and probably brighter than I've ever seen it.
Representative Schultz, anything you want to add to that?
No,
I don't want to cut you off. You brought up a lot of very important topics there. I mean, workforce development, workforce alignment crosses not only our regulatory environment, our economic development, but also bridges into our educational structure and delivery of our education. Broadband infrastructure does the same. I think we've seen throughout this pandemic a highlight the need for us to have that within our communities across the board, but also highlighted the opportunities that provides for us to develop our workforce in more remote areas, to bring workforce in from other areas because people do want to be here. And Senator or President Adams, to chime onto that, I think that probably only adds to the growth problems that Derek talked about last year, which was our focus of our summit last year. So very happy to hear that those are all things that are very much on your radar. I want to move right now to a topic that has dominated a lot of the discussion, and rightfully so, which is diversity and inclusion throughout this past year, and some of those events that have really forced us to look at things and talk about things in a way that maybe we haven't in the past. President Adams, I know you just signed the compact, the business compact, the diversity and inclusion compact. Speaker Wilson signed that on behalf of the House as well. As we look forward to this legislative session and or this year, a lot of the things that we need to do are not necessarily legislative. What are your priorities in those areas? And I'm going to actually throw it to you, President Adams, if I may, just as a signer of that compact. One of the biggest questions I get from people is, what now? What next?
In Utah, we come together. And you've seen that happen with COVID and our blended approach. We just don't do one or take one or the other options. We try to get as much data as we can, and we try to make good decisions given the information that we have. We want to be inclusive, and we have pushed a commission forward. In the Senate, it's headed by Senator Vickers, and we've included House members and senators and the executive branch. And we're moving forward to try to make sure that the policies, the things we do, go way beyond what I'd say individual liberties, but try to be as inclusive as we can for everyone so that they feel comfortable and so that we are as inclusive as we can possibly be in the state of Utah. That's a high priority for us, and I think you'll see legislation come forward. We did a little bit in a special session. And as we tried to deal with the chokeholds, Black Lives Matters, but there's other things that we're dealing with, and I think as you see us roll those out in a legislative session, you'll see broad-based support. And again, in any issue, there's always fringes on each side of it, and as we try to use that, what I call a great collaborative process inside of the legislature, which I believe the process actually brings out the best ideas as we go through that. I think you'll see some great solutions that we'll take care of this year.
Just if I can add a little bit, I think President Adams hit the nail on the head when he said, in Utah, we come together. And it's one of the neatest things I've experienced serving in the legislature is to see how we can bring so many different people from so many different walks of life and bring them together and find a solution forward. We're not going to get everything that we want for the most part, but we find a way that works and that works for the citizens of the Utah. And a great example of that was the George Floyd issue that kind of kicked a lot of this stuff off this spring. President Adams mentioned that we came together and we were one of the first in the nation, if not the first in the nation, to actually pass some reforms in regards to that issue. And we came together with myself from the House, Senator Vickers from the Senate, and we brought the minority party into the discussion, and we brought law enforcement into this to discussion, and we came up with something that was wholly supported by all groups. And that's the way we work together in Utah to accomplish those types of things.
Thank you, Representative.
Yeah, I'd just say that, as you look at all of these factors when you're trying to bring everybody together, that you're making sure that we're being inclusive, that we're providing a way that those people who want to come back to the workforce, that they can receive training, that they can compete against everyone, that they're making sure that they're getting a fair wage. And I think that as we look at those factors, that we want to make sure that people feel like they can contribute to society, that there is a place for them, and that we are not discriminating in any way. As we look at our universities, as we look at the tech schools, making sure everybody feels welcome there, making sure that they have the services that they need so that they can be their best self. And I think that that's one of the things that we look at as we look at statute, as we look at administrative rules, is to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to be successful.
So it's also really important, I'm going to just tag on to what Representative Peterson said. Thinking about this in terms of education is really important. Making sure we do know that I think there's data actually in the Kim C. Gardner book that shows the difference in educational outcomes for those who are economically are not economically disadvantaged versus those who are. We have to continue to work to make sure that we're helping all of our students succeed. And I do really believe that the path forward is an education path. That if people have the opportunity to be able to achieve educational outcomes, to graduate, to go on to tech colleges, to get some kind of post-secondary work, whether that's at a university or a tech college, that's what really gives people the ability to pursue careers, to be able to have jobs that support their families. And that's something that really does lift everyone up. So I think we have to be focused on how do we really help people succeed individually. And we are a state that certainly believes strongly in self-determination. We need to combine that self-determination with making sure we have the right support systems in to help people get the skills they need to then be able to make their way.
Thanks, Senator. We appreciate all of you in that regard. In working with the business community throughout this past year, it's been very heartening to see companies take a really hard look at their policies, take a really hard look at their practices, and see what they need to do to improve. And sometimes those can be really painful conversations, and we appreciate the legislature being willing to do the same. We know as we look through our code over the years, there are some very unfair things that have made their way in there, and the willingness to look at those things and to help address them is something that we're really grateful for. So thank you. I want to move on again. We've talked a little bit about and touched on infrastructure, a big topic, but as we go into this particular session, there's been a lot of talk over the past year, given where interest rates are and given how much growth we're seeing, a lot of talk about bonding, about transportation projects, about other projects. I want to open that up to the group to talk about what do you see happening in that area? What should we expect as people are, thinking about what they should be planning to tackle? What should they realistically be looking at? Who wants to take that one? Go ahead, Representative Schultz.
Okay. We've had the bonding discussion for a couple of years now. We've got a current bond that up until this last year, still had some room on it. This last year, we fully bonded it out. The state has a ton of capacity in regards to our bonding capabilities. We are, our debt levels are significantly lower than what they were in 2012, and so we have the room to do that. One of the things, those of you who've been following the budget, also, we have a whole bunch of one-time money that's going to be available this year. And so there's been a lot of discussion about taking a portion of that one-time money, coupling it with a bond, and try to take care of some of these infrastructure projects. And I think one thing that historically those types of projects has just included roads. We know we've known this for several years now that roads aren't the solution along the Wasatch Front. Anyways, one of the things that was eye-opening to me when I became chair of transportation, I sat down with Carlos Braceras, the director for UDOT. And he said, Representative Schultz, there's no way that we can build enough roads in this state to meet the demand of our future population. And so he says transit and railways and buses and multimodal is going to have to play a big part in that. And so there's discussions the last year or two about doing a strategic double tracking of Front Runner. I think that's one of the bigger priorities that we can do. Where we can add more trains and then also offer some express trains and speed the trains up so that we can get from Provo to Salt Lake much quicker and Ogden to Salt Lake much quicker and vice versa. And so hopefully that's something that makes its way into it. I know there's several other projects out there. That's just one that I'm thinking of. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll follow up. I was looking to the other side to see if they wanted to go, but if anybody doesn't know what it is, Google air taxi. I think that's a great solution too. But and if you do, there's I think technology is going to be our friend. But we do have some one-time money, and I think as we look at bonding, I think we'll probably look to that one-time money first, and then see if we can't bond. One of the challenges that I see we just haven't been able to come to grips with it is our gas tax is basically a dying tax. Whether it's the increased vehicle miles that a vehicle gets, or whether it's the fact that we're moving to different types of energy sources, electric and hydrogen and others, our gas tax is not going to be able to continue to fund our infrastructure. And as we look at bonding, that accelerates projects, and I think we probably need to accelerate a few of them. Double tracking, front runner. Water's a big one. Water's our limiting factor for growth. The fiber we've talked about, all the infrastructure projects that we can do, but we really need a stable funding source. And this may not be the year, but I surely think we ought to look to try to figure out a way to be able to augment our gas tax and find a funding source for infrastructure in addition to bonding. So I think when you look at potentially the one-time money, you look at bonding, and maybe even another revenue source of some way somehow of funding the infrastructure we need. We need to build infrastructure. Without it, our quality of life is going to deteriorate. Mobility, being able to drink water, being able to get on the internet, those are all things that I think all citizens expect out of a community. And as a government, if we aren't providing those, I think we're not taking care of our responsibility to the public. We need your support as we go after these, because some of them are difficult to do, and especially trying to deal with the gas tax. It's just a diminishing tax without inflation in it. That's going to be a heavy lift. And whether we get to it this session or not, I hope there's discussion about it.
Yeah, so I think the president hit a lot of things on the head there with our funding source and what the mix is between our one-time funds and bonding, and then also what is our capacity, even how much can we build. And so we've been talking to UDOT about how much capacity is out there within the different companies to be able to continue to expand, and making sure we're addressing the strategic projects that we need to build so that the Wasatch Front can continue to grow. And then also, as Senator Millner pointed out, looking at rural Utah, what roads we need to work on there, as well as broadband, and then of course inland port, as President Adams talked about. There's a real component that rural Utah is starting to push with that, as far as the spines. And so how do you fund that and make sure that's flowing into the inland port here along the Wasatch Front? So as you look at all those things, what's the balance of funding? How much should government be doing, and what is our role in making sure that we can foster an environment so that we can continue to let the state grow?
So I think contextually, we need to think about this in the fact that this state's going to double in population in the next 40 years. And we owe it to future generations to be able to plan for that future, and a future that works for those generations that follow us. It's your grandchildren and maybe even some of your great-grandchildren. People planned for us, and we need to plan for those who will follow us. And I do think that's going to take some kind of real rethinking about, as the president said, revenue sources that help to support that. We're going to need to think about public-private partnerships, perhaps in different ways than we've thought about it in the past. I'm not sure we can do it all, and can we get more creative and innovative in terms of being able to put together strategies that will allow our state to keep pace, both with our internal growth, but making sure. I came to the state in the 80s, and the interesting part of that time is that our economy wasn't very well diversified at that time. There was an economic recession. Times were pretty tough, and state revenues went down, but there weren't jobs. And people were graduating from college and leaving the state because there weren't jobs in the state of Utah. That's not true today, but I don't ever want to go back. I want to make sure that we have a thriving, strong economy, and we have it for decades to come. And that requires us being much more strategic and thinking more innovatively about how we do this and how we do it in a way. I mean, we hear more from companies today. I mean, I think transit's a really important part of this, that water projects are going to be important, broadband, all of those elements. But we have to be focused on creating that kind of future where everybody in Utah that wants to stay in Utah and stay near family has the opportunity to have high-paying, family-sustaining jobs.
Thank you, Senator. It's been brought up several times. I'm going to put you all on the spot just a little bit, but the one-time money, the money that was there, you all, like the good businesses here, took the time at the beginning of the pandemic to really evaluate our budget going forward. You'd just come out of a legislative session where you'd passed a budget, and you went back and reevaluated it and pulled back what we thought we didn't need and prepared and put the state in a very good posture moving forward. Because of that great planning, you are in a very different position, I think, right now than maybe we thought we might be. But as you mentioned this one-time money, what are the priorities coming from within the legislature as to how to best use that money? And maybe, President, I'm going to spend...
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk. And before we get to one time, I just have to reiterate what happened this last year. If nobody remembers, we, because of, I think, a great business community and what happened and how we managed the pandemic and looking at lives, and one fatality is too many, but also livelihoods, because we know it's tough to exist without livelihoods. In the fall, we actually, and Representative Schultz and Senator Millner led the way with this, and we actually funded inflationary growth for our, and this is in the middle of a pandemic, a 1.8 or 2% increase in funding education. Education will be our number one priority, always has been. But we're the only state, I believe, in the nation to be able to do that. And when states were cutting their budgets, in fact, I think it's really sad. It's a tragedy that Hawaii, they don't have money to pay their teachers, and they're laying off their teachers. And not only aren't they giving them increases, they're having to consolidate to be able to fund education. And then recently, we were able to reinstate what we did last session, was the 6% increase in education funding. We call it the weighted pupil unit, the WPU, but we increased it by 6% and actually funded Medicaid growth, because we had Medicaid growth during a pandemic, imagine that. And then we funded and tried to take care of our state employees. And even today, I think the job market's tough and we're trying to keep the best employees. But as a state, we were able to do all that. So as we look at this one-time money, you know, it's pretty hard to spend on education, on ongoing revenue, because we just don't do that in Utah. So probably the number one priority for it will probably look to infrastructure, the things we've talked about, to be able to build the capacity we have to handle the growth. And so whether we bond or not, it'll depend on how much of that we have. $1 billion sounds like a lot of money, but we have $300 million in buildings that we didn't build last year because of the pandemic, and those facilities I think are looking for it. So it'll be a good discussion as to what happens, but the number one priority for that will probably be infrastructure. So.
Thank you. I don't want to get too in the weeds yet with the education stuff, because President Adams hit on it, and we're going to talk about it again in a minute. But please don't overlook what happened with education funding this last year. It's been mentioned a couple times. It'll be mentioned again, I'm sure. But last year, Utah is the only state in the nation to actually increase education spending. And then just this fall, obviously it hasn't passed the full legislature yet, but it's in a good spot, and when it passed the EAC, Executive Appropriations Committee, largest, $400 million, the largest increase in education spending in the state's history. And so you couple those things together, and I think that's huge. And I think you talk about the priorities. What are some of the priorities? That's always been one of the number one priorities. And I think due to Amendment G and different things, that was able to kind of come to the forefront and happen already early on in the session. But it does leave a lot of one-time money that we still have to work through. President Adams has made the comment, as well as everybody else up here. Infrastructure is going to play a key role in that, and not only roads, but the inland port and the rural areas has been talked about a couple times too. I think that is so important for a whole host of reasons. You know, you look at if we set up spokes on the outside of the Wasatch Front and Salt Lake City to catch a lot of that cargo that's going in and out of the state, so that it doesn't have to hit our roads inside Salt Lake City. That in many cases currently is hitting the road right now, and so I think that has some things that can benefit our air quality as well as congestion on our roads, and be a huge benefit to rural Utah. And so I hope that we take some of that one-time money and help fund the inland port with that.
Yeah, I'd just say that I think that when you talk about one-time money, obviously that's one of the things that we can use strategically. You don't want to do anything that's ongoing, and so infrastructure is the natural place for that. I do think that one of the things that you're very fortunate as we live in this state, where as we all work together, is that we do really relook at the budget, and that we do have consensus numbers. Not every state has consensus numbers that are developed between the executive branch and the legislature about what our revenue stream is going to be. And so the fact that we all budget towards one number makes a big difference, and we're all very fortunate. We all benefit from that. And then the fact that we have a balanced budget. And not very many states have a AAA bond rating left. And so when we talk about infrastructure, the very fact that we can go out and bond at the lowest rates, I think the last bond was like 1.27%, means all of our money is going a lot further. And so as we talk about all these projects, as we talk about the prison, as we talk about inland port, as we talk about roads, as we talk about the mass transit system, know that your legislature is looking very closely at each of those projects and making sure that each one of your dollars goes as far as we can to make sure that we are creating the environment so you all can be successful and that we can have a great economy in the state of Utah.
So, Senator Millner, I actually want to ask you a specific question in this regard. As we've mentioned education quite a bit, and Representative Schultz brought up the increased education funding this past year, you were very heavily involved, obviously, with the legislation and the constitutional amendment that went forward this year in Amendment G. In light of that educational funding increase, what should we continue to expect? We know it didn't end up in the exact posture that it came out of the session last year. So what should we be looking for? I wanted to.
First of all, Representative Schultz and I worked really closely together. This is a great example of a team sport. It took not only within the legislature, but also the education stakeholders that were part of helping us really do two things. With Amendment G, we really needed some flexibility in the legislature going forward to be able to always be able to fund highest priority needs in the state. And what Amendment G was allowed us to do was to consider, doesn't mean we'll do it, and I don't think we'll be doing it this year, but to consider being able to use income tax funds to also support our children and people with disabilities. And we know a lot more about education of kids these days and know that it's not just about what happens in the classroom, it's also about children being ready to learn and making sure that they aren't hungry, or that if they need glasses, they have glasses, et cetera, that we meet the health needs so they are ready to learn. And Amendment G opened up the window for that and gave the legislature future flexibility. But at the same time, it enacted House Bill 357. And not to go too far in the weeds, but what that did is put in a kind of foundational education framework for public education for the future. We've always talked about this earmark, which was kind of an earmark on a revenue source, but it didn't translate into a prioritized basic educational funding framework, and that's what this did. So that it says in the base budget every year, as long as we have money, we're going to put money into growth and into an inflation factor on the basic school, the minimum school program. That is really significant for making sure we stabilize funding for education over time, because the problem's always been that we're doing really well, we have a recession, and then we have to cut, and it takes us forever to come back up. This helps to straighten that line going forward, and I think it's going to make a real difference in our ability to fund even higher levels for public education over time. But the third thing it did was put in place a public education stabilization fund. That stabilization fund is really an ongoing fund that will make sure that even when we have recessionary times in the future, we're going to be able to keep that commitment to funding growth and an inflation factor on our minimum school program. So that really does straighten the line. And it will make a difference. And this year we already put money back into that program, and in fact we exceeded what the kind of statutory requirement, put an additional $50 million in beyond that, because we want to make sure that we can keep that commitment. And some of us are still a little concerned going into next year. We had a lot of economic stimulus out there this last year. We want to make sure we're going to be able to keep that commitment. So I think it's foundational, I do, for public education and historic. And again, I can't say enough about our education stakeholders who are willing to come to the table with us and to rethink how we're doing things, to put together a education funding framework for the future that will protect their funding, that will stabilize it over the long term, and allow it to grow.
Thank you so much. We are very sadly out of time. Selfishly, I'd like to keep you all captive for another hour and ask my questions. President Adams, you have something you want to add there? And I'm
I'd like to thank the Chamber for having us. But one thing that I would like to maybe express and appreciation, we talked a lot about our economy, and we talked briefly a little bit about the commission that was formed back last April. And I would maybe call out a few people. Derek Millner was on it from the Chamber, and obviously Representative Schultz, and Senator Hemmert was on it, chaired it with General Burton. But there was an urgency back then to try to move forward. We found that the people were actually having appendicitis and not going to the doctor and having ruptured appendix rather than just going to a doctor and get it taken care of. So we moved quickly to reinstate regular medical care and economy, but I feel as much urgency today as I did then about another issue. And the vaccine dissemination, I'm just going to share some data if I could before we end, and maybe everybody knows this. If they do, I'm sorry. If you don't, you should know it. But we have about 1,300 to 1,400 fatalities from COVID in the state of Utah. Of those fatalities, 1,000 to about 1,100 of them are over 65. That means 77% of fatalities are over 75. Finally, next week, we will start vaccinating those over 70. We need to move faster, and people that have been around me know that I have a sense of urgency. If we can cut our fatalities by 77%, think of what that does for your businesses. Now, I know everybody wants the vaccine, but we have to be smart, and there's only 200,000 of them, but we need to vaccinate those that are most vulnerable. And we need to get those over 65 vaccinated, because if we do, your businesses will do better. So be patient, but that is a high priority. I think we should have been on it before now. At least I don't want to, but we're on it next week, and I'm really excited. And just be aware that statistic is staggering. 77%, 1,000, 1,100 of those fatalities of the 1,300 are over 65. That means there's only 300 that are under 65. So let's be smart, and hopefully you'll support us as we try to get them vaccinated.
President, I can assure you this group is very much on board with helping with whatever we can do to help accelerate that process for a myriad of reasons. Thank you to each of you. Again, I want you to know we don't take you for granted. We recognize here in the state of Utah that we are incredibly fortunate to have a legislature that is willing to not only work so closely with the business community, but makes themselves so accessible and is so transparent with information. We genuinely look forward to working with you through this session. And again, just can't express our gratitude enough. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.